Welcome to Revenge Report. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let's dive in. I wasn't expecting the call. In fact, I hadn't even thought about aerospace in years. But when my phone rang that afternoon, the name on the screen pulled me back into a world I'd left behind. Claudia, we need you. Now. It was Steve Mitchell, one of the old engineers I used to work with. His voice was urgent, breathless even. He never called me unless there was something wrong. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to mask the unease creeping up my spine. "There's been a failure, a critical one. The jet engine, the Barracuda prototype, it's gone south. We need your expertise to get it back on track." I didn't even need to think about it, not when Steve spoke like that. The Barracuda was the last project I worked on before I left, a state-of-the-art jet engine designed to push the boundaries of propulsion technology. But I knew it wasn't just the failure that made Steve call. It was the history. My history with this project, my history with the company. I didn't want to go back. Not really. But I knew I would. The truth was, I had unfinished business, and it wasn't just about the engine. "Fine," I said, already pulling on my jacket. "I'll be there in an hour. Don't go anywhere." The last thing I heard before hanging up was his breath of relief. Then silence. An hour later, I was standing outside Hangar 3, the massive cold building that housed the Barracuda, and 1,000 memories I'd hoped to bury. My hands felt clammy as I walked through the door, the familiar scent of jet fuel and metal greeting me like an old lover. Inside, the hangar was a mess. Engineers hunched over laptops, their faces drained from lack of sleep. The smell of stale coffee lingered in the air, along with the subtle, gnawing tension that radiated from every corner. And there they were, the people I once worked alongside. Some were the same faces I had known, their graying hair a reminder of how much time had passed. Others were new, probably trying to clean up the mess the veterans had left behind. But one face in particular caught my eye. Colonel Nathaniel Ainsley, my father, standing near the engine, arms crossed, his steely blue eyes fixed on the team like a hawk watching its prey. I didn't want to see him, not after everything that had happened, not after the way he'd treated me when I was let go. But there he was, the man who had once been my greatest mentor and my worst enemy, the man who, in so many ways, had destroyed everything I worked for. His gaze snapped to mine the moment I walked in. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, then quickly, a hardened mask settled into place. He didn't say a word. Of course he didn't. He never did. "Claudia!" Steve called from across the room, waving me over. "We're glad you're here." I walked toward him, forcing myself to ignore the simmering tension in the air. But it was hard. It always was when my father was involved. He stood there, arms crossed, barely acknowledging my presence as if I was just another engineer in the room. "Let's get to work," Steve said, leading me toward the diagnostics table. "We've been at this for hours, and we still don't know what went wrong." I nodded, pushing my personal feelings aside. The Barracuda was more important than anything else right now. As much as I hated being here, as much as it brought back painful memories, I had to focus. I sat at the table, tapping a few keys to bring up the engine's specs. "I'll take a look at the diagnostics. You guys go over the plans." As I scanned through the data, I could feel my father's eyes boring into me. He hadn't moved, not a muscle, not even to come over and offer his input. He never had when I was part of the team. That hadn't changed. "What's going on?" I muttered under my breath, squinting at the numbers. There was something off about the latest update, a system failure perhaps, but it was deeper than that. The design had been flawless before, and now it was as if someone had tampered with it. A cold chill ran through me as I realized the truth. Something, or someone, had changed the blueprint. I looked up. Steve, sensing my discovery, came over. "What is it?" "There's a flaw in the engine system. Someone removed a critical safety feature. A small one, but it could cause catastrophic failure in certain conditions." Steve looked concerned, but I could see the flicker of something else in his eyes. "What's the likelihood of that happening?" "I'd say about 99% if we keep pushing the engine as is," I said. "Who authorized this?" Steve hesitated, and I knew instantly that the answer wasn't going to be good. My gaze flicked to my father, who had yet to move. Finally, Steve sighed. "Nathaniel signed off on the changes. We couldn't get the approval without him." I clenched my jaw. So it was him. It always came back to him. He had manipulated the project, just like he had done with me. I stood up, ignoring Steve's worried glance. "I need access to the original files. Now all the records, everything." "Claudia," Steve warned, his voice low. "You're treading on dangerous ground. Nathaniel, I don't care." I cut him off, my voice cold. "This is bigger than any of us." The moment I turned toward my father, I knew this wasn't just about the Barracuda anymore. This was personal. And I was ready to take him down. The tension in the hangar thickened as I stood facing the flickering diagnostic screen, my mind racing through every possibility. The engine systems had been altered, its safety features stripped away. Whoever had made these changes had no intention of leaving this project intact. "Claudia, are you sure about this?" Steve asked, his voice low and urgent. I could feel his eyes on me, but I refused to look up. "I'm sure," I replied, still focused on the numbers flashing before me. This wasn't a malfunction. Someone modified the blueprint. And whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. The hum of the hangar's overhead lights felt deafening in the silence that followed. The soft rustle of papers, the clicking of keyboards, it all faded as my father's presence loomed behind me. I didn't have to look to know he was there. His shadow was too familiar. "Claudia," he said, his voice as cold as steel, "you've been away a long time. Perhaps you're seeing things that aren't there." I finally turned, my eyes locking onto his, though his expression betrayed nothing. A simple blank mask that made my blood run cold. "I've been gone, Nathaniel. But I wasn't born yesterday." I took a step toward him, my tone sharp. "Someone removed a critical safety feature. You signed off on it. We both know it's not a coincidence." He didn't flinch, didn't even blink. "You've been out of the game for too long. You wouldn't understand the complexities of the new systems we've developed. You're looking for something that isn't there." His words were calculated, smooth, like he was trying to convince himself as much as me. But I wasn't buying it. Not this time. "Don't insult me," I said, my voice low, icy. "I know exactly what I'm looking at. Someone tampered with the design, and that someone is you. I need the original files, Nathaniel. All of them. Now." The engineers around us shifted uncomfortably, aware of the battle unfolding before them. Steve, standing to the side, didn't intervene, knowing better than to get caught in the middle of this. But my father wasn't fazed. Not one bit. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Claudia," he said, stepping closer. His gaze never left mine, unwavering, like he was daring me to challenge him. "The original files are classified. You don't have the clearance for them, and frankly, I don't think you need them. You're a civilian now." His words hit like a punch to the gut. Civilian. That word still stung, even after all these years. It was a reminder of the fall from grace, the resignation that had stripped me of my position, and of any respect in his eyes. "I was the best engineer this company had when I was here, and you know it," I said, stepping closer to him, voice rising with each word. "You didn't strip me of my title because I was bad at my job, Nathaniel. You did it because I stood up to you, because I refused to let you manipulate everything for your own gain." His eyes darkened at my words, the faintest flicker of something unspoken passing through his expression. But it was gone in an instant, replaced with the same impassive mask I'd come to hate. "Enough, Claudia," he said, his tone clipped. "You've made your point, but this is bigger than you. You don't understand what's at stake here. You don't see the whole picture. The only picture I see is one where you're responsible for sabotaging this entire project," I shot back. "This engine was supposed to save lives, not destroy them." He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "You don't know what's happening. This project, this whole company, it's about more than just safety features and engines. It's about control, power. You're out of your depth." I swallowed hard, refusing to show any weakness. "I'm not out of my depth." "But you are, if you think I'll let you bury the truth." There was a long silence between us, and I could feel the weight of the years between us pressing down like 1,000 tons. Everything we'd fought over, everything that had come to a head the moment I was forced out, was suddenly crashing back. "Give me the files," I demanded, my voice unwavering. "Now." For a split second, I saw something in his eyes, something dangerous, like a door just about to open. But instead of answering, he turned toward Steve, who was watching the confrontation unfold. "Steve, get her out of here," my father ordered. His voice was a low growl, the command cutting through the tension like a knife. Steve hesitated, his eyes flicking between me and my father. But he was loyal to my father, always had been. His shoulders sagged, and he finally spoke. "Claudia, you need to let this go. It's not worth it." I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. Not worth it. Steve, this is everything. This is my career, my life, and this, I pointed to the engine behind me. This is a failure that's going to cost lives if we don't fix it. Steve took a step closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. I'm telling you, Claudia, he's not going to let you win this. He's too powerful, and you're not going to get the original files, not from him. I looked at Steve, my heart sinking, knowing what he was saying was true. Nathaniel had always held the cards, and now, as a civilian, I had nothing. No title, no power, just a handful of old memories and the desperate need to make things right. But I wasn't ready to back down. I don't need the files from him, I said, my eyes narrowing. I'll find another way. I always do. The room was silent again, the air thick with unspoken tension. Steve didn't respond. My father didn't either. It was as if the world had frozen, waiting for the next move. And in that silence, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't walking out of here without the truth, no matter what it took. I had a score to settle, and this time, I wasn't going to let anyone stop me, not even him. The tension in the hangar hadn't lifted by the time I left, but something had shifted in me. I wasn't going to let my father, or anyone, bury the truth again. I didn't need to wait for permission. I would do this my way. I stormed out of the hangar, the air outside feeling sharper, colder. Every breath burned in my lungs, a reminder of how close I'd come to losing everything. My father's face still haunted me, but more than that, it was the nagging fear that maybe he was right. Maybe I was out of my depth. But I couldn't turn back now. I drove to the company's archives, the parking lot empty, except for a few scattered cars. I wasn't sure what I was hoping for, maybe a moment of clarity or just a sense of control. But it was the only place I knew where I could dig deeper. The security guard at the front desk knew me well, having seen me there enough times during my old days at the company. Claudia? He raised an eyebrow, his fingers pausing over his keyboard. Are you sure you're supposed to be here? I didn't give him an answer. I just pulled out my old badge, still valid somehow, and held it up. He took a moment to process, then nodded and waved me through. I didn't have time to be questioned. If Nathaniel was covering something up, this was where I'd find the answers. Inside the archive room, the fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a sterile glow on rows of neatly organized file cabinets. The place smelled like dust and old paper. It wasn't anything special, but it felt like my last shot at uncovering the truth. I went straight for the section marked Barracuda, heart pounding as I shuffled through the folders. There were so many. Engineering reports, test results, prototype adjustments, but nothing looked like it had been untouched. Everything seemed to be signed off, checked, stamped with approval, just as I remembered. But I wasn't looking for signatures. I pulled a few folders from the shelf, quickly scanning the pages. My hands shook as I searched for anything out of place. The Barracuda had always been perfect in theory, but something had gone wrong. The engine had been designed to be flawless, and I knew it was in these records, somewhere, buried under the bureaucratic jargon. And then, I found it. A single sheet of paper tucked between two folders that had been obviously moved, its edges worn from being handled too much. I unfolded it with trembling hands. The schematic was unmistakable. The safety feature, the one I had insisted on all those years ago, the one I had fought for, was gone. It was marked in red, removed for design efficiency. I blinked, the words blurring in front of me. This wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't an accidental change. Someone had consciously decided to strip out this feature, and that someone had been Nathaniel. I needed to be sure. I rifled through the papers, pulling out old test results, comparing them to the current ones. But the data was clear. The engine was tested, but it was never subjected to the kind of stress it would need to go through in a real-world scenario. This wasn't a design flaw. It was sabotage. Claudia? I froze. Turning slowly, I saw Steve standing in the doorway, his face pale, his posture stiff. He'd followed me here. I told you to drop it, he said quietly, his voice low, almost apologetic. You're digging into something you shouldn't. I didn't back down. I didn't even look at him as I slammed the papers onto the table, pointing to the glaring omission in the design. Tell me I'm wrong, Steve. Tell me this isn't exactly what I think it is. His eyes flicked from the papers back to me. He swallowed hard, his lips pressed into a thin line. Claudia, it's not as simple as you think. There's a bigger picture here. There's politics involved, corporate interests, military contracts. We're talking about billions of dollars. I wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not after everything I had already lost. This engine is a death trap, I said, my voice firm. And Nathaniel, he's the one who approved it. He's the one who authorized the changes that could cost lives. Steve hesitated, his eyes darting to the door like he was considering whether to warn me again. Finally, he stepped closer, speaking in a near whisper. I don't know how deep it goes, but I've seen the way Nathaniel operates. If you pursue this, it's not just your career on the line, it's your life. I looked up at him, anger boiling in my chest. What do you mean? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. You think the people at the top are going to let someone like you tear this apart? They'll bury you, Claudia. I've seen it happen before. For a moment, I let the weight of his words sink in. It wasn't just about me getting the truth out. It was about the system, the powerful forces behind this project. They weren't just going to let me walk in here, uncover the evidence, and walk away. They would make sure I was silenced. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't back down. If they try to bury me, I said, voice steady, then I'll take them down with me. Steve's face twisted in hesitation. You don't get it. Nathaniel, he's not just a colleague. He's connected. If you go after him, I don't care anymore. I cut him off, grabbing the papers off the table. I'm going to the board. I'm going to make them see the truth. Steve opened his mouth to argue but closed it again, like he realized there was nothing more he could say to stop me. You're making a mistake, he warned, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My resolve was stronger than it had been in years. I wasn't going to let this go, not after everything I had sacrificed to build the Barracuda to make it perfect. As I walked out of the archives, the weight of the decision hung heavy. But I knew one thing for sure. There was no turning back now. I was going to confront Nathaniel, and this time, I wasn't going to let him win. I was going to expose the truth. The following day was a blur of action. My heart was racing as I navigated through the darkened halls of the company headquarters, the sharp click of my heels echoing off the polished marble floors. I had just left the archives, my mind still reeling from the discovery. The full scope of the cover-up had begun to unfold, and now I had no choice but to finish what I started. I didn't need anyone's approval. I had the evidence now. I knew what had been done, and I wasn't about to let it slide. There was no more waiting, no more hiding. I had to take the fight straight to the top. As I entered the building's secured back office area, I quickly flashed my ID to the receptionist, who greeted me with a stiff nod. She didn't question my presence. She knew me well enough from my days here. But today there was no small talk. I walked past the elevators and straight into the corporate archives on the top floor. The hallway was quieter than usual, a few employees tucked into their cubicles, heads down in concentration. The work they were doing was important, no doubt, but it didn't hold the weight of what I had uncovered. I was breathing shallowly by the time I reached the door to the CEO's office. I had no appointment, no reason to be there other than my personal crusade for the truth. But as I stood before the polished mahogany door, a feeling of certainty hit me. This was my only option. I had to go straight to the source. I knocked once, not waiting for permission. When the door swung open, I was greeted by the blank stare of Nancy Collins, the company's chief of operations. Claudia, she said, eyebrows raised in surprise. What are you doing here? I didn't answer her right away. I just walked past her, pushing the door open wider. I need to speak with Mr. Thatcher, right now. Nancy's eyes darted nervously to the closed door behind her, and she seemed to hesitate for a second. I'm afraid he's in an important meeting right now, she said, her voice thick with forced politeness. Maybe now, I said, my tone hard, my resolve unshaken. This can't wait. It's about the Barracuda project. Her face stiffened. The word Barracuda had weight in this building. Too much weight. I could tell by the way she stepped aside that she knew exactly what I was talking about. Without another word, she opened the door to Thatcher's office and nodded toward me, clearly hoping this would be resolved quickly. Inside, sitting at his sleek glass desk, was Daniel Thatcher, the CEO of this aerospace company, and the man who had turned a blind eye to every misstep and cover-up during my years here. I had no love for him. He was the epitome of corporate indifference, an embodiment of the system that allowed Nathaniel's actions to go unchecked. But right now, he was the one who held the power. He looked up as I entered, his eyes flashing briefly with surprise before smoothing into an unreadable mask. Claudia, he said with a tight smile, his voice too calm for the tension I felt building in the room. To what do I owe the pleasure? I found something, I said, my voice clipped. Something that I think you'll want to hear. Nancy closed the door quietly behind me, leaving us alone. Thatcher motioned toward a chair, but I didn't sit. I stood in front of his desk, setting my gaze directly on him. You're aware of the Barracuda engine failure, right? Thatcher nodded, but I could see the slight twitch in his jaw, the way his fingers flexed just slightly, like he was preparing for a battle. I've uncovered a major issue, I continued. The original design was tampered with. A critical safety feature was removed. This was signed off by Nathaniel. I know it wasn't an accident. Thatcher's eyes flicked to Nancy for a split second before returning to me, his expression hardening. Claudia, I'm not sure where you're going with this, he said, his voice taking on an icy edge. But you need to understand something. The Barracuda project is of immense value to this company. It's not just about safety features. It's about millions, even billions in contracts, military contracts, government deals. It's bigger than you think. Don't patronize me, I shot back, my patience thinning. I know exactly how big it is. That's why I'm here. The truth matters more than money. You can't hide this. If this engine fails in the field, if it crashes, it's not just going to be a bad PR move. People will die. Nancy, standing by the door, shifted uncomfortably. She could feel the heat rising in the room. Thatcher's eyes flicked to her, and I saw the subtle nod he gave her. He was trying to control the conversation, trying to regain power. You're making an awful lot of noise over something that's already been dealt with, Thatcher said coolly. We've made adjustments. We've tested the systems. This is nothing more than a temporary glitch, Claudia. And I'm sorry, but this isn't your fight anymore. That's where you're wrong, I said, my voice steady. It's not just my fight, it's everyone's. You think you can brush this under the rug because of your contracts, because of your bottom line. But I'm not leaving here until I expose what happened. Thatcher's expression darkened. I don't think you fully understand what you're dealing with. If you continue to press this, you won't just lose your career. You'll be out of this industry entirely. I'll make sure of it. I didn't flinch. His words were meant to intimidate, to silence me. But this wasn't about me anymore. It was about the people who were depending on the Barracuda to be what it was meant to be, a revolution in flight. You can try, I said, leaning in slightly, my eyes narrowing. But I'll make sure everyone knows the truth. The engineers, the board members, the people who matter. This won't just disappear, Daniel. You don't get to hide it anymore. I pulled out the folder I had brought with me, the one with all the original design documents and evidence of the tampering. I placed it on the table between us, watching as Thatcher's eyes flicked over it, his calm demeanor faltering for the briefest moment. He reached for the folder, and for a second, I thought he might finally admit what had happened. But instead, he pushed it back toward me, his hand steady. Take it, he said with a forced smile. Go ahead, Claudia, make your case, but know this. There are bigger forces than you involved here. If you want to keep fighting this battle, be prepared for the consequences. I took the folder without hesitation, the weight of it a reminder of everything at stake. I didn't care about the consequences anymore. This was about doing what was right. I'm not afraid of you, I said, turning to leave, but you should be afraid of what's coming next. As I walked out of the office, I heard Nancy's voice behind me. Claudia, you have to understand, this won't end well. But I didn't stop. I had the truth, and nothing, not even Nathaniel, not even Thatcher, was going to take that away from me. The truth was my weapon now, and I was going to use it to bring everything crashing down. The air felt heavier as I stepped out of the sleek corporate building, clutching the folder with the damning evidence still tucked under my arm. My hands were shaking, but I steadied them against my sides, refusing to let the weight of what I had just done hit me. There was no going back now, but there was one thing I knew. I couldn't fight this battle alone. I needed someone who understood the system, someone who could back up my findings and help me take this to the next level. I dialed the number without hesitation, Eric Shaw. He'd been my mentor before Nathaniel and I had clashed, back when I was part of the team, before my name had been dragged through the mud. Eric was one of the few who had actually respected me, the only one who had always treated me like an equal, even when the rest of them doubted me. The phone rang 3 times before he picked up. Claudia? Eric's voice was warm, relieved. I thought I'd lost you. What's going on? I didn't waste time. I need your help, Eric. It's about the Barracuda project. It's a mess. Someone removed a critical safety feature, and I've got the proof. I'm not going to sit back and let this slide. Eric was silent for a beat, and I could almost hear him weighing the situation in his mind. The hesitation was there, but it wasn't out of doubt. It was because he knew just how much trouble this could cause. Where are you? He finally asked. I'll meet you. Half an hour later, I was standing outside the old engineering lab. the dim glow of the streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. The lab was quiet now, the place where I had spent countless nights working on the Barracuda and other projects. It felt strange to be back, but there was something comforting about it too. It had always been a place where ideas thrived, before the politics, before the backstabbing. Eric pulled up in his beat-up truck, the headlights briefly illuminating my face. He stepped out, wearing his usual blue jeans and a weathered jacket. His salt and pepper hair looked messier than usual, and his sharp, calculating eyes held a mix of concern and curiosity. "You really sure about this?" Eric asked, his voice low as he walked up to me. I nodded, holding the folder out to him. "I'm sure. I've seen the numbers. I've seen the files. This isn't just an oversight. Someone did this on purpose." He didn't take the folder right away. Instead, he studied my face for a long moment, probably searching for any sign of hesitation. When he finally spoke again, it was with a quiet intensity. "Who do you think is behind this?" he asked. "Nathaniel," I said without hesitation. "He authorized it, and there's no way he did this without knowing exactly what he was doing." Eric rubbed his chin, his brow furrowing. "This is bigger than just a bad design, Claudia. You know what's at stake here? It's not just an engine failure. This could destroy careers, reputations. If you go after Nathaniel, you're not just going after him. You're going after the entire structure that holds this place up." "I know," I said, my voice steady. "But it has to be done. Someone needs to hold him accountable. The Barracuda is dangerous, Eric. If it gets tested in the field like this, we'll have blood on our hands." Eric took a deep breath, then nodded. "Okay, let's take a look at the files." We moved into the lab, and I could feel the weight of the room, the echoes of old dreams, old ambitions. As I handed over the folder, Eric's eyes flicked through the documents quickly, his face hardening with each page he turned. He didn't speak at first. "God," he muttered, shaking his head as he scanned the engineering blueprints. "You're right. This wasn't an accident." He sat down at the old desk, spreading the papers out in front of him. I watched him as his eyes flicked between the schematics, pausing only to look up at me once, the gravity of the situation settling in. "I knew Nathaniel had his ego problems," Eric said after a long pause. "But I didn't think he was capable of this. We all thought he was a good man, just a little too driven. But this..." He exhaled, rubbing his eyes. "You're right. Someone has to stop him." I sat down across from him, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. I wasn't alone in this anymore. Eric wasn't just going to help me confirm what I already knew. He was going to stand by me as I took down Nathaniel, as we exposed the truth. "There's something else," Eric said after a while, his tone shifting. He picked up another piece of paper, this time a system diagnostic report. "This engine, whatever was done to it, has been masked. They've been hiding the failures under layers of red tape. It's almost like they've been preparing for someone to come looking." I felt my pulse quicken. "How do you know that?" "The way the diagnostics have been manipulated," he said, tapping the paper with a finger. "It's like they're covering their tracks. This wasn't just a mistake, Claudia. Someone's been planning this for months, and they've been hiding their tracks so well I almost missed it." I shook my head in disbelief. "You're telling me someone's been hiding evidence for months and no one noticed?" Eric didn't answer immediately. He just stared at the papers in front of him, like he was piecing together something bigger than we both realized. "You've got the right idea," he said finally, "but you're not going to be able to do this alone. You're going to need more than just me to expose this. If we go public with this, we need solid proof. We need witnesses. We need allies." I leaned forward, feeling my heart hammer in my chest. "What are you suggesting?" "I know a few people," Eric said, his eyes narrowing with resolve. "People who've worked in the background on this project. Some of them are ready to talk. Some of them might even be on your side. But we'll need to move fast. Nathaniel's not going to let this go without a fight." I nodded, feeling a flicker of hope burn inside me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a chance to win this. It wasn't just my fight anymore, it was bigger than that. "Let's do it," I said, determination in my voice. "Let's bring this whole thing down." Eric looked at me for a moment, his expression unreadable, before finally nodding. "We'll need everything, every document, every testimony. If we're going to take Nathaniel down, we do it the right way." "We'll do whatever it takes," I said, standing up. "I'm not stopping until this is exposed. Not until the truth is out there." As we gathered the documents and prepared to make our move, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were at the edge of something huge. This wasn't just about an engine, it was about justice, about righting a wrong that had been buried for too long. And I wasn't backing down. The days that followed were a blur of planning and organizing. Eric and I worked in secret, combing through records, contacting potential allies, and carefully mapping out our strategy. We knew this wouldn't be easy. Nathaniel had power, and he had been at the top of this game for far too long. But for the first time in years, I felt a sense of purpose that had been missing from my life. We couldn't just expose him quietly. We needed to take this to the board, the very people who had given Nathaniel the authority to destroy everything we had worked for. We needed to force them to see what had been hidden for so long. It was the morning of the presentation when the weight of it all really settled in. I stood outside the boardroom, dressed in a crisp black suit that I hadn't worn in years. Eric stood beside me, his face determined, but there was a nervous energy about him too. We both knew this was a turning point. It wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. This was bigger than that. "Are you ready?" Eric asked, glancing at me as we waited for the doors to open. I nodded, though the tightness in my chest told me just how much was riding on this. Ready as I'll ever be. We exchanged one last glance before the doors opened, and we walked inside, into the lion's den. The room was filled with the usual suspects, board members in tailored suits, their eyes calculating, their expressions unreadable. They sat around a long, polished table, the air thick with the weight of corporate decisions. At the head of the table sat none other than Nathaniel. He didn't even look surprised to see me. His cold, calculating gaze met mine immediately, his expression still a mask of indifference. "Claudia," he said, his voice flat, "I didn't expect you here today." "Funny," I replied, taking my seat without hesitation, "because I think this is exactly where I need to be." I took a deep breath and glanced around the room, my mind racing. The board members were quiet, waiting. They had no idea what was coming. Eric moved to stand beside me, and we set up our presentation. The projector hummed to life, and I saw the flash of recognition in Nathaniel's eyes when the first set of documents appeared on the screen. I could feel the tension in the room growing thicker. The truth was coming, and there was no way to stop it now. "We're here to discuss something that's been hidden for far too long," I began, my voice steady, even though my heart was pounding. "This is about the Barracuda project, about what's been done to it, and more importantly, about the lives that are at risk because of it." Nathaniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. He knew what was coming. "I've gathered the evidence," I continued. "I've uncovered records that prove the Barracuda's engine design was altered. A crucial safety feature was removed. And the person who authorized these changes was none other than Colonel Nathaniel Ainsley, the project's lead architect." I clicked to the next slide, revealing the altered blueprints and the approval signatures, Nathaniel's name clearly visible. There were gasps around the table, but Nathaniel didn't flinch. He didn't even seem surprised. He simply sat there, watching me with a calculating gaze. "This is premeditated," I said, my voice rising. "This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. And now, we have the evidence to prove it." One of the board members, a woman in her mid-40s with short, dark hair, leaned forward. "Are you accusing Nathaniel of sabotage?" I turned to face her, feeling the weight of her question. "Yes, I am. And I have proof." The room erupted into hushed murmurs. There were a few gasps, some whispered comments, but I could tell that many of them were still unsure. Nathaniel had a lot of influence, and the room was filled with people who depended on him. They didn't want to believe what I was saying. Nathaniel's cold voice cut through the noise. "Claudia," he began, his tone smooth, almost patronizing, "I understand that you've been upset, but this is a serious accusation. Do you really think you have the credibility to take down everything we've worked for? This company? This project? You think you can just walk in here and dismantle years of progress?" I met his gaze without flinching. "I'm not here to dismantle progress. I'm here to ensure that this engine doesn't kill people. You authorize these changes without any regard for the safety of the pilots, the crews, or the people who will be flying in these planes. And for that, you should be held accountable." He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor as he did. "You don't know what you're talking about. The Barracuda is going to revolutionize aviation. And you?" He pointed at me, his voice hardening. "You've always been a roadblock. You think I'm the problem? You never understood the vision. You were too focused on details to see the bigger picture." I stood up too, meeting his glare head on. "I understand the vision. I understand it better than you do. But this This is about human lives. This isn't just some project you can throw away when it doesn't fit your agenda. You took out a safety feature that would have prevented catastrophic failure. The board was silent. Some of them were staring at Nathaniel, waiting for him to respond. Others were looking back at the evidence on the screen, their expressions flickering with doubt. Nathaniel remained calm, though I could see the tension in his jaw. "You've made your point, Claudia," he said, his voice laced with menace. "But you don't have the full picture, and you never will." But before he could continue, Eric spoke up, his voice firm and clear. "Actually, Nathaniel, she does have the full picture, and I'm backing her up." The room fell deathly silent as everyone turned toward Eric. He stood beside me, a rare act of defiance in this corporate world. Eric placed a thick stack of documents on the table, sliding them toward the board members. "I've verified her findings," he said, "and I can tell you that these changes weren't accidental. They were intentional. The safety feature was removed under Nathaniel's direct orders, and we have the signed approval records to prove it." Nathaniel's face drained of color. For the first time in this meeting, there was a flicker of panic in his eyes. The board members began flipping through the documents, their murmurs growing louder. They were seeing the same things I had seen: the altered schematics, the missing safety protocols, the signatures that confirmed it all. One by one, they began to look at Nathaniel, uncertainty settling in. He was cornered, and he knew it. "This is a serious violation," Eric continued, his voice unwavering. "You've put this company, the engineers, and everyone who works here at risk, and now we're all accountable for it." Nathaniel didn't respond. He simply stood there, his eyes darting between the board members as if searching for a way out. But there was no escape. The room was filled with tension. But for the first time, I felt like I was in control. The truth was out. Nathaniel's empire was crumbling, and I was the one who had brought it down. The board members slowly began to speak among themselves. Some were still hesitant, but I could see the change in their eyes. They were beginning to see what I had known all along. Nathaniel was no longer untouchable. As the discussions continued, I stood tall, feeling the weight of everything I had fought for settle in my chest. I wasn't just clearing my name, I was ensuring that the Barracuda and everything it represented would be held accountable. Nathaniel's silence spoke volumes. This was just the beginning. The weeks that followed the boardroom confrontation were a blur. The corporate world I once belonged to had shifted beneath me, and everything felt different now. Nathaniel was gone. The Barracuda project was temporarily halted, pending an investigation, and the media had caught wind of the scandal, causing a ripple through the industry. The truth was out there now, and with it came the consequences. But as the dust settled, something else happened. I started to breathe again. I wasn't a part of the aerospace world anymore, and I wasn't sure I ever would be again. But the weight of the battle was no longer pressing down on me. I had fought for what was right, and I had won. That victory, however, didn't come without its toll. The public fallout was messy. I'd lost contact with most of the colleagues I once considered friends, and the company's offer to help me find another position within the industry was quickly withdrawn. I didn't care. At least, I tried not to. I moved into a new chapter of my life, one that was quieter, more peaceful, something I hadn't known in years. It was a few months later when I found myself sitting in my new workshop, the smell of metal and wood filling the air. It was a small space in a quiet part of town, tucked away in a corner of an old industrial building. It wasn't much, just me, a workbench, and a few machines I'd collected over the years, but it felt like freedom. I had decided to teach again. I hadn't shared this with many people, but when I had left the company, I'd been contacted by a local university. They were looking for a part-time instructor in engineering, specifically in propulsion systems. The offer had come at the right time, a chance to do something I loved, without the weight of corporate agendas hanging over my head. The first class had been difficult. I was still adjusting to the idea of being a teacher rather than a worker in the trenches, but it wasn't long before I found my rhythm. The students were eager, their minds open, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had something real to contribute again. It wasn't about the recognition or the fame. It wasn't about being in the room where the big decisions were made. It was about sharing the knowledge, the craft, and the passion that had driven me from the very beginning. It was about building the future, one student at a time. One evening, after a particularly long day of classes and preparing lessons, I was sitting at the workbench, adjusting a piece of machinery, when I heard the knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened it, I saw Isabel standing there, a student from one of my earlier classes. She was bright, inquisitive, and always asked the kind of questions that made me think deeper. She had been the one to approach me a month ago, asking if I would mentor her on a project she was working on outside of school. She was one of those students who reminded me of myself when I was starting out, full of ideas, dreams, and a fierce desire to prove herself. "Isabel?" I asked, surprised to see her. "What are you doing here?" She held up a coffee cup in her hand, a sheepish grin on her face. "I brought you some coffee," she said, stepping inside. "I thought you could use a break." I raised an eyebrow, but I didn't protest. "I could probably use a break," I said, gesturing for her to take a seat. "What's going on?" She looked at me for a moment, then pulled a notebook from her bag, flipping it open to a page full of scribbled designs. "I've been thinking about the jet propulsion systems you showed us last week in class. I think I figured out a way to tweak the design for a more efficient fuel system. But I need your feedback." Her eyes sparkled with excitement, and for a brief moment, I saw the same fire in her that I had once had. It was the fire that had gotten me to where I was today, the fire that I had thought I had lost forever. "Let me see," I said, taking the notebook from her. As I read through her notes, I could feel the rush of enthusiasm creeping back in. Her ideas were solid, innovative even. She had a natural grasp of the concepts, and she wasn't afraid to challenge conventional thinking. It was exactly what I needed to remind me of why I had loved this work in the first place. "You're on to something here," I said, looking up at her. "This could actually work. Have you run any tests yet?" She shook her head. "I've been waiting for your approval before I take it to the next step. I didn't want to waste time if it wasn't going to work." I smiled. It felt good to be in a position to offer guidance again. "You're doing great. I want to help you push this forward. Let's set up a time to run some tests. This could be the beginning of something big for you." Her face lit up. "Really? You'll help me?" "Of course," I said, feeling a sense of pride wash over me. "But remember, you're the one who came up with the idea. I'm just here to guide you." She nodded enthusiastically. "Thank you, Claudia. This means a lot to me." And just like that, I knew this was where I was meant to be. Not in a corporate boardroom, not chasing after recognition, but here, in this quiet workshop, teaching, mentoring, and building something real. The next few months passed in a blur of lectures, design work, and late-night brainstorming sessions. Isabel wasn't the only student who approached me for mentorship. More and more students were asking for my guidance, eager to learn. I had built a small but thriving community of future engineers, and with each new student, I could feel my own passion reigniting. But even more than that, I realized something important. It wasn't just about passing on knowledge. It was about the kind of legacy I wanted to leave behind. I had spent so many years trying to prove myself, trying to build a name, to gain recognition from people who would never truly appreciate me. But now, I understood that my real legacy wasn't going to be in some company's archives or in the giant jets I had once dreamed of designing. It was here, in this workshop, with these students. It was in the knowledge I imparted, in the future I helped build, one lesson at a time. And that, for the first time in years, felt like enough. One afternoon, after class, Isabel approached me again, her eyes shining with excitement. "Claudia, I just wanted to thank you again. I couldn't have done this without your help. This project, it's taking off. I've been in talks with some companies, and they're interested in my design." My heart swelled with pride as I listened to her. "I'm not surprised," I said, smiling. "You've got the talent, Isabel. Just remember, don't be afraid to challenge the status quo. Keep pushing yourself." As she walked out the door, I leaned back in my chair and took a deep breath. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking back. I wasn't hung up on the past. The barracuda, the fights, the corporate betrayal, none of it mattered anymore. I was where I needed to be, and that was enough.